Are you perhaps stuck on your Ironman profile with a Dungeons floor, or have you simply gotten bored of your profile? Well, let me introduce you to one of the most fun things in my opinion in Skyblock. The Dungeons. Now, before I go into all the floors individually, I would first like to name some differences between a normal profile and an Ironman profile. Now, first of all, normal profiles, they run dungeons for money, essentially. Whereas on Ironman profiles, you just run dungeons to spend all your money on random stuff. Which is a bit annoying because, trust me, I went broke multiple times. Secondly, gear can be locked behind a floor, which essentially means gear progression is a bit different. But that's what this guide is all about. Now, for the first 5 floors of the catacombs, the entrance to floor 4, there's not really a lot of things to talk about, which is why I clumped them all together. But one of the important things is definitely to get your hands on a Dreadlord sword, and this, even if you have 0 gear, this can be easily done by running entrance as mage using the lightning ultimate. This should one-shot all the mobs around you. Besides that, dungeon gear also becomes really important, and even in the lower catacombs level, it will outclass your regular outside dungeons gear, so keep that in mind. One of the challenges you will face, however, are shadow assassins. These are being introduced in floor 3, and here just look in a room. If you see a pink name tag from like a Lost Adventure, then you're probably fine, but if not, then definitely be ready for a shadow assassin attack because these things can hit you hard. When it comes to the classes or the builds for the earlier floors, really you can play all classes you want, just it's important to get the milestone. Moving on to floor 5, this floor, by the way, I would recommend to start at around Kata 20, depending on your gear. But this floor is going to be a lot harder because, first of all, it introduces the bedrock chest, which you have to get 300 score for, so dying will result in a larger penalty. But secondly, also, fells get introduced to the floor, and trust me when I say this, but fells hurt a lot. Now, a little side note for all the patcher users, please turn off the entity culling feature because this actually hides the fells before they spawn. And since this floor becomes a little bit harder, you want to already be setting focus on like a mage build, an archer build, or perhaps a tank build. For this, for mage, simply use the Spirit Scepter from floor 4, if you have it already, and either Wise Dragon Armor or any other dungeon set reforged to Necrotic. Now, for archer, either use a Juju if you have one already, but if you don't, you can also just use a Spirit Bow from floor 4 as well, with, of course, any good damage armor that you have. And for tank, now tank you really only need in lower kata parties. The higher kata ones aren't gonna really want a tank. But if you do decide to go tank, then I would definitely say anything that gives you EHP. Maybe some Dragon Armor Protector, old, reforged to Titanic, and that should do the trick. And also don't forget that the Mender Helmet or the Mender Fedora, they're both amazing helmets, and that's because mending is an insane stat. Now, floor 6, you want to start at around Kata 25, and like before, it's heavily dependent on your gear, whether you maybe started before or a bit later. But here, this is the floor where secrets start to play a huge role in the clear, and that's because you need 85% of all secrets to get the full score. This is why I would heavily recommend you to learn at least the secrets in the big rooms by heart. And for that, I have linked the Discord to the Dungeon Secret Guide in the description down below. This is essentially a place where you can see all the different rooms with all the different secrets. As to the viable builds for this floor, with the addition of all that floor 5 loot, we can now exchange the Archer armor for Shadow Assassin. And the 2 swords, the Livid Dagger and the Shadow Fury, might even make room for a Berserker build. This Berserker build would be really overpowered as well in combination with the Yeti pet, because with the Yeti pet you have enough EHP to survive the Terracotta phase, and in combination with Lifesteal as well, that's just going to make you invincible. Also, if you do already have a few floor 6 runs, floor 6 is the place where you can get ancient roses either from the chests or from the golems. Please make yourself a Flower of Truth, since it's such a cool clearing weapon. Alright, but now moving on to floor 7. This is by far the hardest floor of all of these 8 floors, and for multiple reasons. For one, this requires you to find all of the secrets, so please do yourself a favor and learn at least 90% of all the secrets so you don't clear like a monkey. Aside from that, we also get introduced to a new puzzle, being Bomb Defuse. This, however, you can easily cheese using a pig and a silent death, and it works by spawning the pig pet inside of the iron bars, and then you have to take your silent death and aim it at the pig while it's looking at you. Then you teleport behind it, and then you repeat that same thing for the second gate. And also because the boss fight is so long and complicated, and this basically means that there is a high risk of dying there. Also in high kata parties, by the way. Trust me, I've been there. Since in the boss fight there are no teleports allowed, maneuverability weapons are definitely needed. And with this I basically mean the Bonzo staff, which 100% I would recommend you to get. And also the Jerry Sheen gun, which if you have it, it's definitely going to help you a lot, but it's not really needed. Other than that, a Wither Cloak sword, once you get one from floor 7 obviously, is going to be really helpful for lava bouncing, since if you don't have a tank or are perhaps out of his radius, then lava can deal a lot of damage. Now, the tank in this floor needs to have an AOTS or a Soul Whip, because the tank's job in the first part of the boss fight is to stand near the laser and aggro max orb using either the AOTS or the Soul Whip. Meanwhile, the other 4 players go for the crystals, which, I mean, you could argue spring boots are necessary for this, but in my opinion, a Bonzo staff is simply enough. Some people can also go up there with a Jerry Sheen gun. As to the storm phase, it's rather simple, but one important thing that definitely on Iron Man you should do is have thunder bottles in your inventory. This is because Storm's thunder fills up the bottles insanely fast, trust me on this. And with this you can easily get your talisman to the epic rarity without having a recom on it. Moving on to the third phase of this boss fight, the Goldor phase, this is where you really need a Bonzo staff or a Jerry Sheen gun. Also, you should probably know how to do all the terminals, or at least have a solver for them, because if you don't, then it's just going to waste so much time. What can happen in this phase as well is that you might miss a terminal, and the terminal is behind Goldor. Now, for this you can simply activate your Wither Cloak or put on a Bonzo mask, and then use a Bonzo staff to quickly zoom through his hitbox, and then you can complete the terminal behind him. Then just leap to your dungeon teammates to get back on track. Now, the rest of the boss fight is pretty self-explanatory and shouldn't require a lot of skill, so now I want to talk about the viable builds for this dungeon floor. Now, similar to floor 6, we still have Berserker being really good, same as Archer, but sadly Mage doesn't really hold up with the Spirit Scepter anymore because it doesn't one-shot a lot of the mobs in the clear. That's only if you have a lower kata level, by the way. Once you're kind of 35 to 40, depending on your gear, Spirit Scepter might be viable again. Other than that, the tank class is still really useful in this floor, and since you now have the access to floor 6, you want to be using Necromancer Lord in combination with possibly a Mender Crown if you can afford it, otherwise just the Mender Fedora. And like I said before, it's really important as tank to have either an AOTS or a Soul Whip, because your job is going to be to aggro all the withers to you. Now, since floor 7 runs tend to be a little longer than all the other runs, and obviously also a bit harder to do, especially at lower kata levels, I would strongly recommend to use Kismet Feathers, at least in the first couple runs, because you will be wanting a Hyperion as soon as possible, and having 2 chests instead of 1 is definitely going to help with that. Unfortunately, this already brings me to the end of this guide though, but if you do have any wishes for future guides, then please let me know in the comments section so I can already start working on them. Have a nice one.